All right, everybody, welcome to this week's episode of SuperFreq. I am your host, Talíyah. How are we all doing out there? Lots of interesting changes going on for people in groups, for myself, and for the collective as a whole. Here on this podcast, we talk about what organizes human behavior and how we can move towards more coherence in our lives and have reality reflect back to us congruence. So the things that we want and the things that we feel and how we are translated in the world are more in alignment with our potential. So today's kind of a fun one. We're going to talk about the architecture of influence. Possessions, demons, entities. How do we know that we have them? How can you see them, or how to recognize them in other people? And there's going to be layers to all of this, because much of what I talk about is bringing in a new language to define what things are. We have to redefine reality and clarify these definitions so we can bring language to our experience and then be able to articulate how we're feeling in order to, again, clear patterns and have an experience more of a congruent life. So what does it mean for something else to organize you? That's essentially what possessions, demons, and entities are. Something else is organizing you, and then there's no agency. You have lost your sense of agency. So I'm going to just ask I'm going to answer some questions that came in, number one, which influenced this podcast. Essentially, it sparked me answering the call to be able to have this podcast. And I'll approach it through a systems thinking lens, ontological lens, essentially how I see reality from the perspective that I have now. And then the faith layer, theology, because demons is essentially a definition inside of religion and Christianity. And entities are kind of in the New Age world. And then possession is also in like Catholicism, but also gets co-opted in the New Age world. So there's all these different schools of thought talking about the same things, addressing it with very different perspectives. So I'm going to try to synthesize all of that, simplify it for you, and probably share some personal stories about what I've gone through with infiltration and things like that. But the first thing I want to set up this podcast with is a question, okay? Because entities and imprints and lots of different new words I'm going to introduce today, if I haven't talked about them before on previous podcasts. I'm going to give you definitions for things like imprints and phantom imprints and structural echoes. And all of these are computational languages. But in your life, I want you to just ask this question to yourself to set this up. Again, as I go through these different layers. What area of your life continues not to work out? Romantic relationships, familial, financial, the relationship with yourself, where you feel and know that you have potential, that you're here to serve, that you're here to experience yourself in a different way, or have reality bend to you in a different way, or move towards you in a different way. What area is not matching your potential and you can feel it and know it? What threshold are you up against right now? Okay, I'm just going to leave that and put a pin in it. All right, we'll leave it as an overarching question, because I'm going to circle back to what does it mean for something else to organize you. Entities, demons, etc., phantom imprints, all of this can influence our thought patterns and our thought forms. And what we're trying to do is clarify the intelligence that's underneath all of this stuff, again, so we can live just happier, more peaceful lives. So with that, let's get into it. So first question, are demons real? If so, what are they? And so yes, okay, demons are real. They're very real. And I have removed them. I have had demons removed from me very, very, very early on, like at least 20 years ago, when I got into, let's say, perceptual work and the quote unquote healing space, and found Richard Bartlett, found the Russian physicist who helped me understand spiral dynamics and resonance and how to perceive basically just darkness, okay? What was the heaviness that I was feeling? What was that? When did this get imprinted? What's the time function of it? And how do I translate it? And at the time, because I came from Catholicism, I had demons as the language, angels and demons. However, okay, so yes, demons are real, and I'll approach that from a religious framework for right now. They're essentially understood as intelligences that oppose God, okay? You can look at them traditionally as fallen angels. From a systems perspective, to me, they're fallen angles of light, okay? So you have the omnipresent, absolute, self-referential version of light, which is God. And then you have Christ, you have God that moved into an embodied form through Christ. And then you have fallen angles of light who influence, okay, whose influence operates through deception, temptation, accusation, division, disorder, separation, rage, alcoholism, self-abandonment, abuse, and so on. So they're not negative energy, nor are they understood as equal opposites to God. Okay? They're simply non-human. If I move outside of the religious framework, okay? It's a non-human or autonomous intelligence that exerts influence on human consciousness, perception, and behavior, I should say. They can be called entities, spirits, thought forms, parasitic intelligences, which is how I see kind of the overarching influence into our reality now is all of this parasitic kind of dark code that our matrix is running, right? This simulated computer-generated dream world is running. You can see it everywhere. I mean, look at what has happened with demoralization as a signal and then a code, and then it becomes and then normalization. That's a sequence that plays out. Look at what's happening with Hollywood, okay? Disney as purity, and then it recurses over time, gets infiltrated into being a high holy demonic ritual at this point, and to the point where it desensitizes you to become the new normalization, so become the new standard. So then that desensitization, that demoralization becomes the new normal. And we have now we have demonology and sacrifice and Baal worship main stage, front and center, and we're accepting it. That's when it becomes the norm, and that is a pure sequence. So look at what's happening with Ariana Grande. This is present time by the time this podcast comes out. Look what's happening with Perez Hilton. Look at what's going on online with unaliveness being videoed and streamed. Unaliveness attempts being streamed. Self-sacrifice, blood baptisms for Baal worship being normalized. I mean, this is like peak possession, demonology entities, psychic fragmentation, complete and total disassociation, consume, right? Total consumption. That's the sequence of that. So it's parasitic intelligences. So whether these categories describe kind of literal beings in quotes or phenomena or different interpretations of these experiences depends on who is actually reading you, okay? The coherence of the person perceiving what it's looking at. And I'm just going to I'll share some personal sessions with you in a minute. But my experience with demons, and I've done lots of removals on them, the demon within that was removed from me with the person I was working with at the time came from the paternal line, which had a recursion or long-standing lineage, an epigenetic trajectory of alcoholism and abuse. through Catholicism, okay? And I know that is because we could look at when, and this is all through telekinesis, telepathy, this is all scientifically proven stuff, guys. This is not just like woo-woo shit. What we can tell at the level of perception, the access that we had at the time, when that kind of quote unquote darkness installed in the lineage. And because, just as a reference, you are the latest rendition of your family lineage combined as an aggregate. If you have a long-standing lineage of suicide, of, well, I'll say unaliveness, abuse, addiction, dissociation, depression, trauma, abandonment, neglect, rage issues, okay, that is not a normal state of being. That is a line that's had a lot of heaviness, a lot of misuse of power, a lot of disempowerment. The power dynamics, okay, have now recursed, and you're running the latest rendition of that template, literally. So I had this, big removal long time ago, over 20 years ago, and then I got to look after the removal. What happens is like the quote unquote darkness, if you will, that you've moved through yourself, okay? Because you can only perceive to the level and the depth that you have reconciled all of this stuff for yourself. They will actually kind of help you and tell you exactly how they work. They'll give you all the tea. And I went through this when I did this stuff and clearing at the Vatican. I learned so much about all of this stuff. Possession, demons, you can sense it, see it almost instantly. Exactly how they work, what they're doing, how they're moving through the system, how they infiltrate, how they imprint, so on and so forth. And I'll likely be able to answer that as I move through the layers of this particular podcast. But demons possess fixed will, okay? It's very important to understand this through religious lore. They have fixed will, they do not have free will. They know exactly that they have specific orientations. They understand the ultimate boundary of their existence, including that they cannot ascend beyond it. This is hell on earth, okay? They have fixed will, they have names, they have assignments, and they have specific orientations, and they completely understand their ultimate boundary, the ultimate boundary of their existence. And they know they will never go beyond it, and they will do anything to fulfill it. Anything. And they're cunning, and if you like, the rules apply on both sides. If you are ultimately transparent and you have absolute free will to choose to connect to the divine, okay, and choose to have a relationship with God and choose to quote unquote ascend into quote unquote Christ consciousness, okay, let me just say that. If you have the choice to do that, then anything that is of the light can perceive you to help you, and anything that is of the dark can perceive you and influence you. The rules apply as a global setting, period, the end. So they know your ultimate weakness. That's why, just for fun, imagine that you were seen down to every molecule of your body, all of your vulnerabilities and all of your weakness. Imagine the enemy that you couldn't even imagine having access to you. Them knowing all of your deepest, darkest stuff. They know your vulnerabilities. They know what would shatter you in terms of identity. They know how to devalue you. They just absolutely know how to break you open to the core and manipulate you, dominate you, control you. And then on the other side, let's say the optimal version of that is they absolutely know what you're worthy of, what you're capable of, how to get you there, all the tools to be able to reconcile all of your familial patterns, so on and so forth. It goes both ways. So they will come in very cunningly and get you to turn over the power to them. And this is by very specific decision-making, how present you are with your decision-making, how you know better but don't do better, little things like that. That's how you know you've got some hijacking going on. if you can know better, but the body freezes and you can't do better, which I'll talk about in a minute. But demons can possess. Entities, on the other hand, can influence, which takes me to the entity part. So there are hierarchies to different ways you can be influenced by, let's say, the darkness. And by the darkness, I just mean patterns that are inverted, that are open loops, that have not been reconciled. So in the work that I do and where I'm oriented now, faith and theology completely reconciles uncertainty. And so it's allowed me to sharpen and become very, very acute to seeing demons on people, demons in people, like very clearly. It's pretty wild. And those who are in the perceptual work or in this kind of perceptual work where you're kind of tracking people and reading people and researching this kind of stuff, you'll know what I'm talking about. And you'll definitely know that if you are a body practitioner, working in any of the somatic practices, psychotherapy practices. Many of my clients come from all of these fields at very high levels to try to see how they can influence very cunning, sophisticated adaptations, psychological adaptations like narcissism, domination, and abuse. This is all very like infiltration, entity adjacent, demon adjacent behavior, especially like psychopathy and these type of people who come out of the Illuminati and MK Ultra programming. That's for another podcast, but actually I did a podcast on that. Look at the transhumanism one if you want to know more about that. I think I did that like a year ago. All right, so entities. Entities are essentially, in short, some kind of nasty shit at a different hierarchical layer with different constraints, boundaries, and conditions. Okay, so how is reality organized, class? Let us understand the 5 pillars, which I'll repeat a lot. First, you have perception or prediction, okay? You've got prediction, you have constraints, conditions, boundaries, and permissions. That's how reality is organized, okay? Entities have different constraints, boundaries, and conditions. And in the world that I'm in, right, which is this kind of coherence research, frequency first kind of model of reality, they're in systems, we call them phantoms. You can get kind of phantom imprints where you won't be able to see the code, but you know it's running. So a phantom imprint is something that might have been worked on before, but it kind of has a little bit of residual off-gassing. So it's residual patterned information that persists without being an autonomous intelligence. So if I'm like, let's say, picking up on a pattern or why you continue to repeat a certain behavior, even though you feel like you've worked on it forever, it could just be there's a little bit of a phantom imprint there. And with that phantom imprint, there's an attractor. So here's another mechanism, okay? An attractor is kind of like a magnet. So a phantom imprint will attract to a magnet, and it's a mechanism by which people, places, and things come into your life. So entities and demons and possession and any infiltration will use the mechanism of attraction or being an attractor, okay, just like a magnet, and it will latch on to any residual pattern or any residual feeling or an internal parasitic intelligence within you and gain more momentum. It's kind of like Pac-Man seeking more darkness. It needs more energy in order to fulfill itself. So if you have infiltration, or if you have darkness, or if you have demons, or if you have any kind of non-human autonomous intelligence, okay, that is anywhere in your field, it's going to skew your perception, okay? And it is also going to attract and consume because it needs supply. This is why I think ultimately aspects of narcissism are actually demon infiltration and can easily convert into like kind of possession almost, because there's a switch. Narcissists don't have apathy. They start to lose it and they get very defensive and they get very devaluative, and is extremely psychologically dangerous for people to be around them. But there's a switch. It's almost like they have an on and off switch of how dominating and how intimidating they can become, because they can influence the other. So just as another side note, infiltration at very sophisticated layers from a quantum computational lens can quite literally influence the other person's vision to look at them a certain way. Demons can absolutely do this. They change the retina. Don't take my word for it. I've seen it in sessions. And also go watch anything from Father Rapiger, who is an exorcist priest, Catholic exorcist priest in Colorado. He will talk about how they will quite literally influence your perception by changing your retina. People who have come from MK Ultra programs who are really high level assets also talk about this. When you're in Illuminati training or MK Ultra training, they're constantly pushing the conditions and the constraints and the boundaries of your psychic layer. Okay, they're trying to fragment you intentionally so they can create all these parts, and they want to see how many parts they can create. So the personality that they need, that it is going to get signaled, like through a color or like a red dress or a green dress or a certain name. It's like, say a safe word, okay? Something will trigger a personality to come forward to do whatever it is they want to do. And then once the, let's say, mission or their target is completed or their mission is completed, another person or another part or personality will come forward, and they will have no memory of that. It creates an amnesiac sac around the amygdala in the center of the brain. This is all neuroscience. You can go check this out in any kind of Project Paperclip, Project Mockingbird. Look up military projects or CIA projects specifically with MK Ultra programming. And you're seeing this a lot in Hollywood. Disney is MK Ultra programming. Essentially, they want to take somebody out. They will start to instigate safe words and weaken the psyche and break it to the point where you're permanently disassociated, and it's a state of psychosis where they don't have a center of gravity. It's like really sad to watch, and you all know. You've seen it before, okay? So entities have different constraints, boundaries, and conditions, and they will phantomly imprint onto structural echoes, okay? A structural echo is a reoccurring architecture. Okay, it's just a recursion. It's a loop. A phantom imprint is a residual pattern. It's like an off-gassing, okay? And all of that happens through resonance. So attraction is all about resonance, and you're either in alignment or you're not in alignment. You can tell that with people that will come into your life and they'll be like really, really highs and lows, like high charge, super, super low charge. That's resonance incompatibility, okay? Resonance is the mechanism of attraction / reinforcement. That's why certain people come into your life, people, places, and things will come into your life to verify the pattern that, the resonance that you're at. Like, this is a match. This is great. This is easy, okay? It's very, very highly compatible, high field compatibility. Or they will come into your life to catalyze you, to signal you and take you to the next level. Whether or not you can hold that is completely up to your capacity and your level of embodiment. Or they will come in and kind of show you exactly some of the structural, like the phantom imprints and the structural echoes that you still have to clean up before you can embody the next version of yourself. Okay, so what do people historically call possession? I want to talk about this now. So possession is someone controlled by an intelligence or force perceived as an external to the self. So altered behavior, voice changes, morphing, identity fragmentations, memory loss, no agency. Different cultures call this different things. Okay, it can be the ancestors are talking to me. There's channelers will have a lot of, they tend to get possessed. They basically allow their bodies to be used. Something comes in, possesses them. They perform certain things, and then the entity either leaves or it doesn't. So interestingly enough, during Kobe Bryant, okay, I saw this with Kobe because of kind of an agreement he made early on, especially with his daughter. Kobe Kobe had this where kind of something else came in and gave him abilities really, really fast, like from the time he was a teenager until he passed. But very specifically, R. Kelly. R. Kelly could identify, you guys could go look this up. I saw this just by looking at videos with him. I was like, oh wow, he's got like 2 versions of him where he literally was fragmented, but there's something else that came in and then would leave. And he would actively talk about that when he was in prison. He would look at a picture of him and he would say, look, do you see that guy? He's not a good guy. So that was a possession frequency. And you see that a lot in the music industry because they're making agreements to be famous or have lots of money or influence or recognition. And the darkness, for them, it is so easy. Okay, it is so easy to keep you in the lower third of your body. Just possession, sex, drugs, rock and roll, keep you out of the heart space, keeping you out of doing any kind of reconciliation work with internal polarity, all of it. So I want to talk about so if you have possession, which is very, very biblical, lots of possession, demons entering people, not being able to leave them, and then the beginning of what would be modern day exorcism done 2,000 years ago. But prior to that, entities were provoked and called in for specific reasons. So again, from the systems thinking, because the program got installed to access certain information, the mechanism is channeling gives me power. I leave my body, I get power. It is a process of giving up your own agency in order to gain something else. That is the mechanism of possession. And you can knowingly and unknowingly agree to that based on your level of awareness. And so could experiences historically called possession actually be dissociation or psychosis, trauma responses, compulsive states, or altered state of consciousness? Sure. But you know it's possession when it's reoccurring. Okay? So look now. So for example, to kind of bring back what's happening with Perez Hilton, that was a full-blown psychic fragmentation where there was possession in play. And because he ran such deep victim patterns, because I can hear you, like, what are the patterns that are associated with this? So Perez Hilton ran such deep victim consciousness and such deep shame and guilt and powerlessness and dependency on external validation and suppression of personal power. There was so much power taken away from him, and he kind of invented cyberbullying. Okay, so then you've got this, oh my God, what did I do? And then a desperation to find salvation. And he did that through Christ, but that was a false light. Okay, it was basically just a demon pretending to be Christ and offering him salvation, but instead he was trying to sacrifice himself for the sake of salvation. So I say all of that because possession and entities and demons and any kind of infiltration will come in if you have historical and ancestral and epigenetic inheritance of sacrifice, control, fear, victimhood, shame, guilt, dependency, self-abandonment, self-erasure, hypervigilance, addiction, alcoholism, scarcity, obedience, extraction, exile, resentment. Okay, if you're really, really angry, if you have rage inside of you, that is usually a sign. And I say this very directly, that there is some pretty heavy darkness going on, and you may not be aware of it. If you have absolute rage that you switch into, it's almost instant as a response, where you have uncontrollable anger. Okay? Underneath that is very, very, very like heartfelt grief, but it feels uncontrollable to you. That's usually the sign of some kind of like demon darkness going on. And if you couple that with religious indoctrination, boom, there's the match. So you have the code of religious indoctrination by way of sacrifice and shame and obedience. Okay, you can only go to God based on you can only go to heaven based on your behavior. Okay, these are all conditions for your salvation. You have that running in tandem with abuse patterns, addiction patterns, and alcohol patterns, and powerlessness, and dependency, and self-abandonment, and surveillance, and you name it. You have that running in tandem with those things. Then you have the pattern and the behavior that those things produce, which is uncontrollable rage, relationships not working out, a version of you that kind of scares you or scares other people. Boom. All roads lead to like very, very heavy darkness. And eventually that can easily become possession, because someone like that, when they're in a little bit of a switched on, blacked out state, they don't all the way know what they say, especially if they're still drinking and disassociating and moving out of the body. They will make agreements unknowingly just to feel better and to get what they want. So these patterns can function as organizing conditions that make a person more susceptible to coercive influence and total loss of agency. Okay? So infiltration, which I know a lot about, okay, because I had a really big infiltration, let's say, within SuperFreq. And the cleanup was like instant. And I think I talked about this, where it was accommodating a really, really, really old, very old pattern, very, very old lifetime. And it was familial on both sides, and it was really, really mechanical. And the underlying pattern that it accommodated, like the attractor, was, man, I feel really, really responsible for the people, for the signal that I'm holding and the people that I'm helping transform and perceive information for. Like, I feel very, very responsible for them. So it was like a very distorted contract, which kept me in hypervigilance. And it was really, really important at the time, because I didn't have like 19 degrees in all of the synthesizing fields that I'm talking about now, that the information that I had was accurate. So the constraints that I gave myself is that I needed to know everything and that I had to be accurate. I need to make sure that I know, and it needs to be accurate. So those two things, which came from my paternal line. So this is my father, very much like this. So that allowed me to be very accurate and have exactly what I asked for, but it came at the cost of like self-abandonment. And so once I saw the mechanism, boom, it was a really very, very easy cleanup, reorganized, and then took off like a rocket after that, and it was great. So you know infiltration if and when you have a different sense of quality to yourself. So when an external influence gains access to a system, okay, to let's say your system, and begins reorganizing it from within, shaping your perception, your attention, your identity, your behavior, or agency or personal agency and autonomy, without becoming immediately recognizable as the organizing source, you kind of know. And anybody who's working in any kind of new age space or frequency work or claiming to be some quantum healer du jour, I feel that's awesome for them. That's fantastic. But if you don't have a clear mirror, if they do not have an organizing principle around Christ, and I'll just die on that hill, or an extraordinary clear mirror to keep them in check and balances, hands down, they're infiltrated right now. And they can't see it. They can't. Because false light is absolutely real, but you can sense the heaviness. And you also know if they are not able to move past a threshold of knowledge, if they're not challenging their own logic or transforming quickly in front of you, or there's something off about the quality of their information that you feel from them, that's when you really want to start questioning. Are they propping themselves up in hierarchy? Are they putting a mediator between you and access to God? Are they recycling inside of the same blockchain of information that you feel you were getting like 3 years ago? If they're not moving beyond that, they're getting information, they're ping-ponging inside of the same constraint, and they're not able to move past that because they have to give something up in order to get to move beyond that. And they can't see it, especially if they don't have a clear mirror around them. So you have to make sure that you keep really, really good people around you. And when I mean good, I mean embodied. Okay, have somebody around you that's in your life that is a clear mirror, that will be honest with you and loving and call you higher and challenge their own logic, challenge your logic, help you to see patterns more clearly, and that are embodied, who are seeking embodiment. And please don't underestimate how far along you are, especially if you're listening to this podcast and doing this level of work. I promise you, it's like almost instantly. You'll power through like 3 months, 6 months, and you'll get to a year and you'll be like, damn, all of a sudden things will instantly hit you and you'll just reclaim in a way that you didn't think was possible. I know that because I've just witnessed it, literally, not only in my own life, but in the clients I'm working with now, especially this last year. It's been absolute gift to witness people coming home to themselves and live more coherent lives. So infiltration, like especially memic or ideological infiltration, is all psyoptic in nature. Psyops are literally like a loss of authorship by way of thoughts, impulses, behaviors, and orientations. A really good psyop doesn't just change the way you think, it changes who you are. It has you so confused by what you feel the truth is. They hand you kind of a box lunch paper. Here's your little brown paper bag lunch of ideas, ideologies, beliefs, and an identity they want you to orient around. They will feed fear or fixation. They will reduce your sense of agency, and they will reproduce themselves despite conscious opposition. You could be completely against it and still feel a compulsory sense of distorted perception. That's how you kind of know you're starting to get infiltrated. But it's okay, because infiltration just means that it's an organizing condition and you can clean up at any time. And I can say that because the thing that changed my personal orientation, which I talked about a few podcasts ago, it was a very vulnerable podcast, was these crazy removals that I did and I worked on, and with some people. There were handfuls of these really, really intense, like post-Illuminati, post-MK Ultra programming people that came to me, that found me, that were referred to me, and that I worked on reorganizing all of this psychic fragmentation. And a couple of them I had to sign an NDA for, so I'm not going to talk about those too much, but I'll just say that this stuff is very, very real. And right now we're in a spiritual war. That's why you're seeing the amplification of like evangelical Christianity as a psyop, and the merging of orthodoxy with Catholicism now, which hasn't been done in hundreds and hundreds of years. Okay, they're trying to merge these fields together to get people to collapse into one thing or the other. And I can say that you can see it for what it is without collapsing into doctrine. You can follow Christ and be oriented around Christ and have a relationship with God and Jesus and not collapse into doctrine. You can most certainly use other tools without being a witch. Okay, you can do this type of perceptual work, coherence modeling and telekinesis, telepathy. You can study what organizes human behavior, okay, without being a witch and without being a fraud and without feeling like people are calling you crazy or whatever. I'm not the only one talking about this. There are brilliant physicists out there that are talking exactly about what the things I'm talking about. And people right now are coming online actively talking about, like, I have seen the heaviness of hell and I'm terrified. And they're going right to God because they know it's the truth. And I can say that through this orientation, when you serve the divine and when you have something moving through you and you can just be a clear conduit, you step out of the way entirely. The things that I can see and the things that I can remove are not done in my name. Okay, they're certainly not done in my name. I know who I serve, and those things are entirely possible because they're done through the name of Christ. And when you have something that's fucking enormous looking, I'm talking like, imagine a Terminator with drippy, fangy teeth and like a bull, okay, like full ball looking at you in the face going, under what authority do you have to remove anything? Who the fuck are you? And they're basically just listing off every vulnerability you've ever had. You have no power. Who the fuck do you think you are? I mean, it gets nasty. You have to know who you are and who you serve, okay? You have to be fearless when it comes to kind of slaying the dragon, if you will. And like, this is why fantasy and certain sci-fi is so popular and coming online right now even more. They're starting to blur the supernatural with mainstream television because these things are very real. And I have met people who have no clue that they are entangled with possession and demons and entities and darkness and infiltration. So, not that this is a heavy podcast. Sorry if it came off that way. But I find this stuff absolutely fascinating because it's just mechanism. The human nature, okay, our drive is to seek more information, is to have more knowledge, is we want more, is we want to know, we want to have we want to have peace and freedom, but we're not willing to give up this in order to have it, or we are willing to give up. Like, we have all these crazy boundaries, conditions, and constraints around the things that we think we want. And then we have all of this rejection to the thing that will actually help us. So I'm going to revert back to the same question that I asked you. What area of your life continues not to work? Romantic relationships, familial, financial. Do you feel after this podcast that there is potentially phantom imprintation as a residual pattern or a structural echo as a reoccurring architecture that could be influencing your ability to have said things? Just going to leave that as a little question for you guys to think about, because then you kind of can come at it that way. Maybe there's something else going on here. Maybe I have like a persecution wound in my DNA. Well, you also have the God molecule. You also have a worship gene. And those things coexist for a reason. One is meant to be reconciled. The other one is meant to be remembered. And I talk about that in the book as well. So discernment on all of this is how we become more spiritually mature. The more spiritually mature we become, the more embodied we are, the more discernment we have. And the more we trust that no matter what, there's no fear. You can clear anything. You're not going to make a wrong move. This is all learning. But I'm specifically talking to people who are sometimes already in this work, or who are curious about this work, or who are seeing things online, who are seeing possession, who are having a sense, who have a sixth sense, who has other senses that are coming online and are trying to make sense of it. You're not crazy. Everything you think you sense and feel, especially if you're a non-neurotypical person, you have multiple streams of information that you can take and see and perceive, and you're trying to metabolize them at a rate that your body can't handle. And it's creating a glitch. And once you learn how to hone the glitch, okay, it's a space-time glitch. But once you learn how to hone the highest and most acute sense that you have, all of those senses can come into a single moment of gravity, a single point in time. And then you are the ones that are going to be able to change the world and slay dragons and help people help themselves. So I leave you with a positive note. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Remember to stay curious, question everything, and I'll see you guys in a couple weeks. Take care.